What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 14, sleepers and studs.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to give you a sleeper pick and my favorite stud at each position.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, NFL Week 14, let's take a look at the quarterback position. So a stud on the slate that I like is Joe Burrow from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Cleveland Browns, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Joe Burrow has averaged 24.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.9 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 8% owned, projected at 22.4 fantasy points here in Week 14. He's $7,000 DraftKings salary, $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46.5 points scored in this game, with the Bengals favored by 5.5. Joe Burrow has averaged 30, 18, and 32 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 11, 9, and 4 rush attempts. So I like that he's gotten 18 rush attempts in the last 2 games. That gives him quite a lot of rushing upside. So I like Joe Burrow here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, now for sleeper picks, I've already mentioned these guys in my previous videos. Trevor Lawrence from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's now questionable. He didn't practice on Thursday, so keep an eye on that. And Mike White from the New York Jets, but he's got a tough matchup against the Buffalo Bills. So another sleeper pick that I'm looking at is Ryan Tannehill from the Tennessee Titans. You could also consider Sam Darnold from the Carolina Panthers. But to be honest, there's not a lot of sleeper picks that I like. I think Mike White would be my favorite sleeper pick here in Week 14. Only going to be about 4% owned. Despite the bad matchup versus Buffalo, Mike White has averaged 25.1 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 3 rush attempts per game. He's only going to be about 4% owned, projected at 14.2 fantasy points here in Week 14. I'm going to up that to 18 fantasy points. He started his last 2 games, he scored 23 and 28 fantasy points, and he got 3 rush attempts in each of those games. So even though he doesn't have a great matchup, I think he can score close to 20 fantasy points. And he's $5,500 DraftKings salary, $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43.5 points scored in this game, with the Jets trailing by 10. So I like that game script. It should be a passing game script for Mike White. So I like Mike White here versus the Buffalo Bills. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So my running back stud is Derrick Henry from the Tennessee Titans playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the 9th worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Derrick Henry has averaged 19.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 21.5 rush attempts per game and 2.4 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 21% owned, projected at 17.3 fantasy points here in Week 14. He's $7,900 DraftKings salary, $1,100 more on FanDuel, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 41 points scored in this game, with the Titans favored by 4. So Derrick Henry has scored 6, 15, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 11, 17, and 28 rush attempts, on top of 3, 3, and 2 pass targets. So he got a break last week, only got 14 touches. Now he only scored 6 fantasy points, so I think he's due for a bounce back game here. I think he'll get 20 plus touches in this one or return to his season average in volume. So I like Derrick Henry here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, my sleeper pick at the running back position is Jamal Williams from the Detroit Lions, playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the second worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Jamal Williams has averaged 14.9 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 15.7 rush attempts per game and 1 pass target per game. So he's going to be about 3% owned, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here in week 14. I think he can score 12 fantasy points or more in this one, and he's $5,900 DraftKings salary, $1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 52 points scored in this game, with the Lions favored by 2. Jamal Williams has scored 10, 12, and 24 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 11, 18, and 17 rush attempts. So I like Jamal Williams here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So a couple of studs on the slate that I like. I like Justin Jefferson from the Minnesota Vikings, but he is $9,000 DraftKings salary and $300 more on FanDuel. So he's super expensive, although I do think he's going to score 20 fantasy points or more. But if you want to save some salary on a stud here, take a look at Amon-Ra St. Brown from the Detroit Lions, playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the second worst defense overall. They give up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown has averaged 19.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.1 pass targets per game. Even gets a rush attempt, averaging close to 1 rush attempt per game, on the field for 75% of the snaps. Going to be about 29% owned, projected at 18.7 fantasy points here in week 14. He's $7,800 DraftKings salary, $800 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 52 points scored in this game, with the Lions favored by 2. Which I think is surprising here. Not really sure why the Lions are favored in this game. I think it'll be a good opportunity to possibly place a wager on the Vikings, but it's possible that, the Vikings have their playoff seed just pretty much locked up, so they may take it easy. I don't know if they're going to rest anybody, but that might factor into these Vegas odds here. So Amon-Ra St. Brown has averaged he scored 38, 31, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 12, 10, and 8 pass targets. And he got 1 rush attempt in each of his last 3 games. So it's always nice to see those rush attempts for your wide receivers. They could always break one of those rush attempts, go for 20, 30 yards. That's 3 extra points right there. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's projected at 18.7 fantasy points. He's $7,800 DraftKings salary, $800 more on FanDuel. He just looks good. His salary, his projection, his recent performance, he has been on fire. I think he's still a little underpriced, where he's got clear 20 plus fantasy point upside in a fantastic matchup, in a high scoring game, in a close competitive game. So I can see why he's going to be about 29% owned. So I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. Well, it's St. Brown, but I will keep making that mistake and calling him St. Brown. So I like Amon-Ra St. Brown here versus the Minnesota Vikings.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, my sleeper pick at the wide receiver position. Now, I was on this guy since the day that he came back because I know he's a super talented wide receiver. He's been out with injury. He's back. He's getting a good amount of targets the past 2 games. His production is getting back on track, and his salary is still low, and his ownership is still pretty low as well. So my sleeper pick is DJ Chark from the Detroit Lions playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the second worst defense overall. They give up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. DJ Chark has averaged 7.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 pass targets per game. Only going to be about 5% owned, projected at 9.3 fantasy points here in week 14. Only 4,300 DraftKings salary, 1,400 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 52 points scored in this game, with the Lions favored by 2. DJ Chark has scored 15 and 10 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 6 and 5 pass targets. So considering that Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to have close to 29 or around 29% ownership, this could be an interesting play here. If you want to fade Amon-Ra St. Brown and go with DJ Chark, save a ton of salary. Now, it's possible that they put all their coverage on Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that leaves up, a rested, healthy DJ Chark, who could go for 2+ touchdowns in this game. I think he's capable of scoring close to 20 fantasy points. I mean, he scored 15 fantasy points last week on 6 pass targets. So I do think this is setting up to be a fantastic sleeper pick. So I like DJ Chark here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. My tight end stud. Now, a lot of players from this game, but I do think it's a good game to stack. So my stud pick here is TJ Hawkinson from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Detroit Lions, who have the absolute worst defense overall. They give up the second most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. TJ Hawkinson has averaged 12.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.9 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 86% of the snaps, going to be about 11% owned, projected at 12.3 fantasy points here in week 14. He's 5,100 DraftKings salary, 1,400 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 52 points scored in this game, with the Vikings surprisingly trailing by 2. So TJ Hawkinson has scored 7, 15, and 8 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 6, and 9 pass targets. So I like the volume and a fantastic matchup. So I like TJ Hawkinson here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, now my tight end sleeper pick is George Kittle from the San Francisco 49ers playing the Tampa Bay Bucks, who have a good defense overall. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. George Kittle has averaged 10.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.4 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 91% of the snaps. Going to be about 4% owned, projected at 9.6 fantasy points here tonight. Only 4,300 DraftKings salary, 1,600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 37.5 points scored in this game, with the 49ers favored by 3.5. Now, George Kittle has scored 4, 6, and 24 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 3, 4, and 6 pass targets. Now, I know Jimmy Garoppolo is out, and what a shame. It would have been nice to see Jimmy Garoppolo play against Tom Brady. That would have been a fantastic matchup. But Garoppolo is out, but I still think George Kittle can have a good game here. And he's super low salary and low ownership, and he's got a great matchup. So I like George Kittle here versus the Tampa Bay Bucks.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.